Ape-Like, from Travis. Hey fellas, I was a bit behind in my listening and just got caught up and wanted to reach out after your remarks in episode 162. One of your stories included a dog-like creature that had ape-like characteristics and moved like an ape. Brennan, all the way back in 2018 when I first emailed the show, I told you about an experience I had with a similar cryptid in rural suburban Michigan. Now, my first letter was pretty much book length, so I wouldn't expect you to recall any of this. The incident with seeing this ape-like thing is one of the most vivid, unexplained experiences of my life, and it felt good to hear episode 162 and learn that someone else had seen a similar creature, just a different color. I found the original email and copy and pasted my lengthy description below if you're interested in rereading it. Oh, lastly, Brennan, if you come back to London, Ontario or thereabouts, let me know. It's only 2 hours away from me. Okay. Thanks, guys. Take it easy. Well, good news, Travis. I will be there. Travis goes on to say, I am not into cryptozoology. It's never really been my thing, even though I have a strong interest in animals. The branch of history I spend most of my time in is environmental history, and I pay close attention to both animals and how humans and their governments have treated those animals. As my childhood experience with Aaron and the Orb or UFO or what the fuck ever, I trusted my eyes more when I had someone else with me who could verify that we had seen something. In this case, it was my then girlfriend Cassie. It was around 2006. And in the spirit of honesty, there is no reason you or anybody else should believe what I say. We had both been awake for a long time and had flown from Amsterdam back home to Michigan that day and attended a fairly mellow graduation party that night where we both had a couple of beers. We were extremely tired, and I probably should not have been driving, more from lack of sleep than a couple of beers. So you can maybe take what I say here with a grain of salt. Cassie, for her part, confirmed we had both seen an animal we could not possibly name, but she wanted little to do with the topic afterwards. When I would bring it up later, for the most part, she would ask me why I kept wanting to talk about it, that it was something we should just forget. But unlike most of the experiences I recounted for you here, this was something I never forgot. However tired I was, despite the beers, this particular instance stands out far and away as the most lucid and undeniable of all the unexplainable events I've ever experienced. The party we'd attended wasn't far from Cassie's house, and we were able to take unpaved back roads there and back. As we drove back to her place, I noticed the high summer foliage on the side of the dirt road, the edges of which rose into something of a ridge, as if I was driving my Ford Focus along a long, car-sized rut. I noticed the weeds to my left rustle in the glow of my headlights, and as I was already driving at a snail's pace due to the severe washboarding of the road, it took little effort to raise my foot from the gas and cruise to an almost stop. Look at that, I said to Cassie, and then the sentence just died in my mouth, because I found myself unable to say whatever that was. In fact, I'm not even entirely sure I was able to say the sentence out loud. I was just stumped, as my brain struggled to make sense of what the hell I was seeing. As the tall grass parted, an animal, roughly 3 feet tall, emerged. It was the color of, and appeared to have the fur and texture, of a deer, but it was no deer. It walked on its hind legs, almost upright, but possessed disproportionately long front limbs with which it assisted its gait, pulling itself forward. It frankly moved like some sort of ape or other primate. It had a longish nose, its eyes were large, pitch black, and reflected no glow from the headlights as it strolled from one side of the embankment to the other. What the fuck was that? One or both of us said, and there was a lot of profanity and puzzlement and sputtering, but in the end we just went back to her house and went to sleep. And when I tried to tell other people about it, they were quick to tell me it was a coyote or a fox or a raccoon with mange. I have looked at pictures, and I don't believe that was the case, mostly because of the way it carried itself. An escaped chimpanzee that was maybe an albino or had mange? I suppose that's possible, and probably more likely than some sort of uncategorized mammal wandering the woods of near suburban southeast Michigan. Regardless, what I saw was not anything I've ever been able to categorize. So thank you, Travis, and obviously, Paul, I am desperate to know what you think of this.
I have no clue.
Interesting. This does not sound familiar to you.
No, it sounds very different to anything I could even try and explain it away as. I mean, obviously, somebody who has a deep interest in animals and biology can tell you how a creature moves. You can, you can tell a creature from the way it walks, or the way it carries itself, or the way it stands, even the way it lays. And the description just doesn't match, especially with the size, the dark eyes. It's peculiar.
Yeah, and folks, I won't blow Travis up and say who he is, but Travis is an academic. He works in a university setting, so he's not. Not again. We talked a little bit about this assumption that some people who have these experiences are maybe a little bit dimmer than others. That's obviously not the case generally. And Travis is an academic. He's a trained professional. He is not given. I've known him for a few years now. He is not given to just random flights of fancy. He's not that kind of person. So I trust his judgment on this, which makes it all the more bizarre.
Yeah, it doesn't fit into any category, especially Michigan, because there are lots of stories. Most people will say Michigan's most famous cryptid is obviously the Dogman.
There's
a lot of Bigfoot sightings. Neither of those two creatures sound anything like what Travis saw.
So this couldn't be some. I guess if it's 3 feet tall, it doesn't sound anything like we think of Bigfoot.
I mean, it could be a juvenile, but most of the time people will report eye shine in Bigfoot encounters. Of course. Same as Dogman. So, and the southern part of Michigan isn't renowned a hotbed of cryptid activity, and most of the cryptid sightings tend to be towards the north of the state. Obviously where Elkhorn and places like that, and Bigfoot's being reported all across Michigan, around the Great Lakes areas, and spreading into either county, either state on both the east and the west sides of it. So when I read the report from Travis, I couldn't place it. I couldn't find anything that sounded remotely similar. It is strange, and therefore it would be daft of me to try and explain it away with an existing cryptid, or as Travis says, it doesn't look like any of the creatures that people put forward, which is always the same. It's always a coyote with mange.
Yeah. Yeah, it's Brent getting out of the shower. We know, we get it.
Well, at least they didn't say it was a chupacabra.
Oh, yeah. I've never had any particular affinity for goats. Let's not start that rumor.
That's not what it said on that wall that time.
Yeah, but you put it there. It doesn't count.
That's true. Sorry about that. I forgot.
One thing that occurred to me just before we head on to the next story. Remember on the Toronto episode, we talked about Mimagwezi, the little people.
Yeah.
The river people in Toronto. And I mean, geographically, if you take away the border, I haven't been there, so I'm a little bit talking out my ass here, but isn't that all sort of similar topographically? Sort of southern Ontario into southern Michigan?
Yeah. Well, most of the northern US and the southern Canadian areas are essentially identical.
Right. So,
really, in topography and things.
Right. So if something like that is said to exist in the Toronto area, I wonder if it's impossible that such a thing could exist in southern Michigan. Again, this idea of like a little person who's sort of like kind of like a magical creature kind of living. I'd be curious to know if there's any water nearby, any rivers or lakes or streams, anything like that. Because again, I believe the Mimagwesi are said to exist in those areas.
I suspect we may be able to locate something from the historical record of any tribes in the area. I would suspect that would be the best place to start.
Right.
And see what Native American stories and oral histories are available in that particular area and which particular tribe there. Because there are numerous tribes in North America that have stories of little hairy people as well as big hairy people.
Sure.
You only have to think of Pukwudgies over
of course.
in
Yeah.
in the Hockomock Swamp area. Yeah, another excuse to say Hockomock in my awful Boston accent.
I love it.
But there are little people stories from all around North America, depending on certain tribes. But similarly, once again, these are tribes that never had any contact, and yet they all have very similar stories as they do about Bigfoot.
Well, as we all know, Paul, they made them up.
Of course they did. Yeah. Of course they did.
They just happened to all made up exactly the same things. Just random
it's like whenever we find petroglyphs and things like that, and they've got 10 animals we all know, and then there's a Bigfoot. And they go, oh yeah, they've just made that up. Have they?
Yeah.
Well,
Little
they've
poetic
painted all
license.
these 10 animals that we know, and that one is made up. It's the only
Yeah.
animal there that's made up because it's the only animal you refuse to admit exists.
It's like they say people who make movies they get to make the commercial project, one for the studio, and then they get to do one for themselves. They can kind of do whatever the fuck they want. So that's what happened there. The guy, he's like, oh, here's all your animals. I did it. Here's your educational material done. Now I get to make one for me. Here's a big hairy guy. That's just his slash fiction. Yes. That's his personal pictograph pornography. That's that's Bigfoot erotica before there was erotica to write.
Yes. Peter Jackson's The Frighteners. The film he had to make to get the green light to do Lord of the Rings.
Yep, that's exactly it. In fairness, he really kind of managed to make that his own. I mean, that's a pretty fun movie.
Yeah, I remember going to see it and thinking, because obviously I was a big fan of Jackson, his early work.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure I've mentioned this before. I still remember the reaction of somebody who came into the pub and said, oh, yeah, we were talking about how brilliant the first Lord of the Rings films were. And I was saying, oh, yeah, brilliant. I love Peter Jackson. And they'd seen Brain Dead and, what's the other?
Bad Taste?
Bad Taste. And I said, oh, have you seen Meet the Feebles? And they said, no. I said, oh, Meet the Feebles. I said, it's a bit near the knuckle, but, Oh. A week later, he came in, he went, the fucking hell's with that you told me to watch? I mean, what's going on here? There's a rat with AIDS. and terrorist animals and sexual assault and a dirty fox and drug addict puppets. What it was like watching the Muppets on crack. I thought, yeah, that's the idea. Yeah, it's a very strange film, Meet the Feebles.
To say the least.
I'm amazed Hollywood wanted Jackson to come, But
I wonder if it's because he was willing to work cheap.
Well, yeah, they thought that.
Yeah, that's fair.
And they went, right, I need £500 million.
You idiots.
Okay.
Yeah, and
I
they
love
made
Brain
history.
Dead. I love Brain Dead. It's still probably the greatest New Zealand horror film ever made.
Oh yeah, it's the only other one I can think of is Black Sheep, off the top of my head. I mean, obviously Australia's got a lot of great horror stuff like Razorback and Body Melt and Boar, of course.
Lake Mungo.
I know Lake Mungo's popular. I don't love Lake Mungo.
I think it's quite interesting. I wouldn't want to watch it again. I've watched it.
Yeah, same here. I would agree with that.
I mean, it's all based on one jump scare. That is essentially it. It's an hour and 40 minutes for one shit scary moment. Really. Whereas Razorback, you've just got this giant boar ripping everything to shreds.
Oh, Razorback's a masterpiece.
Brilliant. A bloody thing. Shot it 6 times. Fucking still coming.
I think Australian voice Paul is one of people's favorite accents on this show. And I get it.
Struth. That's great to hear. I'll tell the boys down at Yowie Yard all about that. That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Crikey.
Crikey.